Star Trek already answered which character is Enterprise captain when Lower Decks ends. When Star Trek Lower Decks first debuted, it felt like a loving send-up of the franchise, a self-aware animated comedy poking fun at Starfleet bureaucracy, holodeck malfunctions, and red shirt disasters. But by the time its finale rolled around, the show had matured into something deeper, an honest-to-goodness part of the Star Trek canon that cared about the franchise's legacy. Naturally, that meant it couldn't resist one of the most tantalizing questions any era of Trek must face: who commands the USS Enterprise, Starfleet's flagship, during the time frame of the late 24th century? Surprisingly, the answer to that question isn't left hanging in mystery. In fact, Star Trek already revealed the captain who sits in the center seat of the Enterprise by the time Lower Decks concludes. Piecing together the canon, crossovers, and subtle timeline details, we find that the franchise already answered the riddle of who leads Starfleet's most famous ship in this transitional era. The Enterprise legacy in the 24th century. The Enterprise isn't just another ship, it's the crown jewel of Starfleet. Across the generations, its captains have become legends: Kirk, Picard, and later successors. But the question of Enterprise's command structure after Star Trek Nemesis has always been murky. We know Jean-Luc Picard was promoted to Admiral after Nemesis. His flagship, the Enterprise E, remained in service, though the canonical details of who succeeded him have been fuzzy. By the time of Star Trek Lower Decks, which takes place in the late 2380s, the Enterprise is still out there. And naturally, Trekkies have always wondered who is in charge. The finale of Lower Decks doesn't directly show the Enterprise bridge, but the answer comes from elsewhere in canon. To find it, we need to look at Star Trek Nemesis, breadcrumbs in the Star Trek Prodigy timeline, and even the novelizations and extended lore that the writers occasionally wink at. Lower Decks timeline placement. The first key is figuring out where Lower Decks sits in the grand timeline. Lower Decks begins in 2380, 1 year after the events of Nemesis. The finale, with its character growth arcs and ship transfers, places the show in 2381 to 2382. This is well before Star Trek Picard, which starts in 2399. So when the animated series ends, the Enterprise E is still canonically active. And though the show never directly features it, other parts of the franchise hint strongly at who's in command. The mystery of the Enterprise E's captain. Nemesis leaves the Enterprise E intact, but with Picard, Riker, and Data all leaving the bridge crew behind. Riker accepts command of the USS Titan. Data dies during the final battle with Shinzen. Picard continues commanding the Enterprise E for a while. But at some point after Nemesis, and before Picard, Jean-Luc takes a promotion to Admiral. That leaves the Enterprise's chair vacant, and Star Trek canon quietly fills in the blank. The official answer? Worf. Worf becomes captain of the Enterprise. The big reveal comes much later, not in Lower Decks, but across Star Trek's interconnected lore. In Star Trek Picard Season 3, Worf makes a casual reference that effectively canonizes his command of the Enterprise at some point. In fact, behind the scenes, showrunner Terry Matalas confirmed that Worf served as captain of the Enterprise E after Picard left the chair. This fits perfectly with what fans already suspected. Worf's arc throughout The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and the films position him as a natural successor. By the time of Nemesis, he had already been entrusted with critical command responsibilities, and his loyalty to Starfleet had been reaffirmed. So when Lower Decks ends in 2381 to 2382, it's clear the Enterprise's captain is Worf. Why Worf makes sense as Enterprise captain? On a thematic level, this is deeply satisfying. Worf's journey is one of the most compelling in all of Star Trek. Once an outsider Klingon on a human starship, he grew into a figure of honor, wisdom, and leadership. His command of the Enterprise represents both Starfleet's trust in him and his evolution as a character. From warrior to leader, early Worf was often portrayed as hot-headed, but his later years showed restraint, discipline, and a capacity for diplomacy. Symbol of unity. Having a Klingon in charge of the Federation's flagship is a powerful symbol of Federation-Klingon alliance. Narrative payoff. Fans watched Worf rise through the ranks for decades. His captaincy is the culmination of that journey. Thus, by the time Lower Decks concludes, fans can confidently place Worf in the captain's chair, even if the animated show never directly depicts it. How Lower Decks alludes to the Enterprise without showing it. It's worth noting that Lower Decks does pay homage to the Enterprise and its legendary crew, even if it never answers the captain question on screen. In Season 3's crossover with Strange New Worlds, Boimler and Mariner fawn over Kirk and Pike, indirectly acknowledging the legacy of Enterprise captains. Easter eggs throughout the series remind us that the Enterprise is still the most famous ship in the fleet. Boimler's obsessive Starfleet fandom almost certainly includes keeping tabs on who commands the flagship, even if the show doesn't spell it out. By avoiding a direct cameo, Lower Decks smartly keeps the focus on its own misfit heroes while respecting the Enterprise legacy. What about Picard's timeline? Some fans might argue, if Lower Decks ends around 2382, maybe Picard is still captain. After all, we don't know exactly when he took his promotion. That's true, but the balance of evidence suggests he left the chair relatively soon after Nemesis. Picard's admiral years included his campaign to relocate Romulan refugees, which began almost immediately after the supernova threat was identified. By Lower Decks' time frame, it's far more likely Picard was already in Admiralty service, leaving the Enterprise to a successor. And canon gives that successor as Worf. Thus, unless Lower Decks secretly ends much earlier than fans think, the Klingon warrior is already Enterprise's captain by its finale. What this means for Star Trek canon. This revelation fills in one of the most persistent gaps in Starfleet history. For years, fans speculated wildly about who commanded the Enterprise E after Picard. Some suggested LaForge, others thought Shelby, and still others imagined a brand new character. But canon's choice of Worf feels like the most logical and emotionally satisfying outcome. It also raises tantalizing storytelling possibilities. What adventures did Worf's Enterprise embark on during the 2380s? Did the crew of the Cerritos ever cross paths with him off-screen? Could future Star Trek shows set in this era finally depict Worf's captaincy in action? Given the appetite for more legacy characters after Picard Season 3, it seems increasingly likely. Lower Decks' legacy and the Enterprise connection. Lower Decks may have ended without directly answering the Enterprise question, but in many ways, that's part of the show's genius. It knew not to overshadow its core crew, the Cerritos' ensigns, by pulling the focus to the Federation flagship. Yet thanks to the broader franchise, we still have closure on the mystery. By the time the credits roll on Lower Decks' finale, the Enterprise is still boldly going. And in the captain's chair sits Worf, son of Mo, a warrior who grew beyond his beginnings to embody the very best of Starfleet. It's an answer that honors both the franchise's continuity and one of its most beloved characters. And it proves once